KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the lecture for the month of May 2013. Welcome to the site. To the new members, welcome back to the old. This is going to be a fantastic lecture. I'm very excited about it. It's going to kind of stretch your style choices. I think it'll give you a few new ideas on how to get some interesting effects in your animation. I hope it is as interesting to you as it is to me. This is really, kind of where I like to focus almost all my attention if I can in terms of trying to find new style. And that is, of course, Cartoony. This is the advanced Cartoony smears and multiples. So this is, well, basically, if you go back to the beginning of CG, we had rigid objects. You couldn't even deform the objects, and if you tried, it looked horrible. If you just watch Tron, you'll see that the beginning of CG had a really rough time deforming anything. Then you started being able to deform stuff. But you really didn't have blending. You had basic simple deformations on objects again. If you watch the Pixar short film animated entirely by John Lasseter called Andre and Wally B, that's what you'll see. You'll see those objects that are basically parented together, and there's no deformation. There's no joints or skinning. Obviously, where we are now, there's so much versatility in the rigs, and really anything is possible, but we still have this need, or at least I feel it, to capture some of those awesome things that we used to see in our favorite childhood cartoons. The things like those advanced cartoony concepts like smears and multiples. I'm pretty stoked about doing this one, and I think you'll enjoy it. I'm going to be using the Pierre rig because it was specifically designed to be able to do multiples very, very easily on the rig. If you are using any rig of your choice, well, it's not that hard, and I will run through very quickly about how to kind of get the exact same effect that I'm getting here. But I really just want to talk as I'm working. I have a very simple shot set up, and I'm going to be animating it in front of you and talking while I work. I just want to just go through the thought process of what's happening as I'm doing it. To start at the very, very beginning, you should be up to speed on the Cartoony lecture, which is basically the lecture in which I describe the mindset that is behind cartoony animation. It is a direct approach. It is not a roundabout way. It is not something you don't start breaking your workflow just because you want to do a cartoony shot. It's still workflow. And then the intermediate cartoony concepts, which is a lecture where I take some of the basic concepts and I build on them. Specifically, I start talking about how we can add a multi-layered impression, how we don't just have to rely on one impression to be on screen at a time, but we can actually make it so that the audience is seeing more than one thing and getting like a really robust and deep impression from the animation, and multiple times per shot. Not just taking one idea, but taking many ideas, putting them into your scene, and making sure that the animation is coherent and cohesive, fun to watch, readable, exciting, and also enjoyable to animate. That's the workflow. So in this one, we're going to, like I said, we're going to tackle some of the advanced concepts like smears and multiples, and basically how to put them into your scene and not feel the sort of arbitrary nature of these things sort of getting in the way. We're going to talk a little bit about how those beginner cartoony concepts like the 2-frame run cycle and the push timing affect things like smears and multiples, and we're going to get into a little bit of workflow on that topic as well. So let's go ahead, I guess, and just get started. I'll start working through the scene and talk as I go. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's take a look. All right, here is trusty Pierre, and he is actually relaxing in his chair. I've done the very, very rough blocking on the chair. This is not something that I would probably do in step mode, although I would definitely encourage you to first approach this in step mode. We kind of have to move a little bit faster than the workflow should be on this, but it's kind of a situation right now of do what I do or do what I say and not what I do, just because well, I don't want to be here for 5 hours on a lecture, and I'm sure you don't either. So anyway, so the scene is this: he's set up and he's leaning in his chair, and it's balancing, and it tips, and then it tips back a little too far, and he starts swinging his arms to regain balance, and right as it starts to fall, he grabs onto the table and pulls himself back, and then it lands. So we can watch this at speed and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, again, super rough blocking, but really the idea here is to get a scene where we have ample opportunity, to use these advanced cartoony concepts. I actually did a parent constraint of his root control to the chair geometry. So his entire body right now is constrained. That would probably be, in terms of workflow and setting up the scene, getting it ready to animate, that would be how I do a scene like this. So if you want to know how I would get a character set up to be in a shot where he's interacting on this level with a prop, it would just be a simple constraint, the mouse controller on the chair. Okay, so we're going to have him basically in pose, and I'm going to be using copied pairs right now on the keys. And it's not unusual to again, like I said, it's not all just the fact that I need this to fit into a normal KennyMurray.com length lecture. This is the kind of scene where you kind of, with this complex sort of interaction with the chair, you want to make sure that you're seeing kind of everything you're getting. A stepped preview would, I think it would be just a little distracting, because you're not seeing actually everything that you're getting. But there are exceptions to every rule, and that's my workflow. Again, your workflow is your workflow, mine is mine. So you might find that it's actually super distracting not to do it this way that you normally do. So anyway, enough about that. So let's get him. He's in this pose, and this is fine. I'm going to make it so that his legs, I'll do that just a little bit later, make it so his legs are swinging, kind of explaining how it's going, the chair is going back and forth. And then, but at a certain point, once he gets past a certain point, we need to key his body into like a really worried pose. And that's going to be, see right now he's very relaxed, that's going to be a much more rigid pose, all right? The camera's going to be somewhere over here, all right? So actually it probably is a good idea to create a camera and kind of just frame your shot so that you can work in the perspective, something like this, and then I can go back to perspective and work and go back to camera view, all right? So somewhere around here, I'm going to key all the keys, controls on his body, and find the right moment where he should go into that kind of like frantic pose. So let's say we're going to start right here. I'm going to constrain my selection just to curves. Okay, I'm going to hit S on this key, make sure we're not losing anything, and we are. I still haven't fixed the iRig to not get left behind on. For that blend parent to not be keyable. I got to remember to do that. Anyway, so from frame 22 to 20, let's say 4 frames, he's going to go just a little bit rigid, which would mean that his hips are going to come off. He's going to almost like straighten out and bend his back kind of the other way, and definitely in the upper part of his spine, his neck and head. Is this his collar? Oh, that's just the collar. We're going to have this really super kind of pose change right here. Okay, so he really kind of like comes up off the chair. Now that also might be sort of like a Superman impossible feat in the body. But in Cartoony, we're not as concerned with where this action is going to be centered from. Remember, when I give examples like watching films like Burning Safari, I say all the time, I say, look at the footfalls, for instance, in the run cycle in the chase sequence when the baboon is going after the robot. Just look at the feet. And I challenge anybody to find like 3 consecutive frames where the feet are actually falling in a real footfall, like, or a real like run cycle or pattern like that. And you can't. And it's because when we're doing cartooning, we're not concerning ourselves with things like, where is the weight centered from and whatever. Our first and foremost, we're concerning ourselves with what impression are we going to give and how are we going to give that the strongest. And then we try as much as we can to animate that with good weight, but we're trying to get the impression right before we get the body right. Okay, so when someone gets shot out like a rubber band and they're hovering in the air and like kicking their legs, those are all very strong impressions, but they have nothing to do with physics. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to, I'm sure some people I know are gasping at home, and some old first, and then kind of like physics and mechanics as much as you can to support that impression and that support that performance choice, okay? I mean, really, when the mayor from Horton Hears a Who gets like those 30 shots of Novocaine in his arm and he's running and it's like flapping behind him like a flag, like how can you possibly say like, wait, where is that arm flap centered, you know? So anyway, so let's go back. So he goes into this pose and I want his hands that are, basically behind his neck, kind of like relaxing, to kind of come out to this kind of like steady, like ready pose, like oh boy, like what's happening here? Okay, and I'll put them both, and I'm doing this again kind of straight ahead. I'll fix timing a little bit if we run into timing problems and timing errors, but for now it's kind of again a little bit more of an issue of getting the character into position to give the impression that I want to give. I also might, my workflow is definitely to key everything again. I'm going to make sure that this doesn't have a key on it. Is at 1 and is locked. Oh, I can't lock it because it's reference. I actually would love to put a little bit of a scale on the pupil right here, and actually just make his eyes go just like a little bit wide. I love these eyelids. These are so fun to work with. In fact, I'm liking what's happening on that other side, so I'm going to copy it. I'm going to do just whatever. And this is as much as I would get into the face at this point. Maybe even that was too much. Honestly, workflow does come down to working on the big things first and the smaller things last. But even in blocking, it can be a good energy to see and feel the character actually kind of beginning to react to the situation you're putting him into. So this kind of like scared face, this can be inspiring. This can give me ideas. This can feed me as I'm watching this scene kind of come alive. Okay, so I'm going to key everything again. Okay, and so there's going to be just a little bit of a hold. All right, and then actually I just want to fix the timing just a little bit of the rotation of this thing. Okay, now we're going to key the first moment of the scramble, okay? The first moment of the scramble. It's going to be when it looks like, so we're going to hold on this pose, and it's going to be when it looks like the chair is beginning to tip backwards. So let's say it's about 34, okay? I'm going to hit set key again. All right. I'm also going to do what is going to be my hold. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag and set on 32 as well, so that if we need to work this transition, it's already in there and doesn't affect the tangents that I've set on frame 26. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to make these key ticks just a little bit bigger. There we go. Now you can see what's going on. Okay. All right. So what are the first things that we need to start thinking about with this? With the multiples, I want him to be cycling his arms, and I want to be a flurry of arms. Your first instinct that you might have is pretty good. Normally, what we think of is that it needs to be almost like motion blur. That is good, but you also want to make sure that the impression is also given that the arms are moving so fast that we're actually, like when the frame is open on the camera, or the shutter, sorry, is open on the camera, that we're actually getting 2 or 3 even distinct poses. So I would say that a good workflow is to start with what looks like, and this is an iterative workflow. Maybe I should have mentioned that at the beginning. It's an iterative workflow. It's definitely the kind of workflow where you're working and you're taking into consideration as you're working and judging as you're working. Not necessarily planning it out perfectly and even thumbnailing your multiples and then putting them in, and it's like a shuttle launch. Everything is perfect before you do anything. I hate that workflow practice anyway, but it's particularly troublesome and foolhardy to try to do that when you're doing advanced cartoony, like in a shot like this. Okay, so your initial instinct to do almost like motion blur is good, and that will give you at least one of the multiples that you need to make it seem like you're getting like a fast speed. So almost so an arm that's almost basically ghosting or just a little bit behind your hero arm actually could work. So just know that you can't do the whole thing. It can't be like motion blur, because then this is what you'd get. If you have like the arm moving like this, you'd almost have just like a ghost image. It would be like motion blur plus like I don't know what. So you definitely need to make sure that you're not going straight motion blur. But let's start there. It's a fine place to start. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see how many frames I have before I want him to really reach out. Okay. So it's about 48. So it's about 14 frames of really nasty scramble. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to key it right here and key 2 frames before, and then on this frame I'm actually going to key when he grabs onto the table and pulls himself forward. Now, like things like finger posing right now, I'm not concerning myself with that. It's not important right now. Not at all. In fact, I did set a key on everything, so I can actually even start working this pose as well. So at least I know kind of the range that I am getting when it does come time to hit this pose. And he's going to whip his arm as well, and that's where we're going to do the smear. So we're going to do multiples on the arm cycling, we're going to do the smear on him whipping his arm forward. Okay? Okay. I know I can't hear you at home, but it just makes me feel good that perhaps you are actually saying something when I ask you a question. Okay, Kenny, you got it. All right. I'm trying, if I can, to sort of counterpose the spine, make it so he's leaning forward, but it's just his arm that is really stretching to the limit before it pulls him back. Okay, and then on this frame, I'm actually going to key this and then key this to 0 and repose this back on the table so that it stays put as he lands. And we'll fix all this. We'll fix it with the pose in the body and whatever. But anyway, so this is So this is the time, this is the range that we have, 34 to 46 right now. So it's 12 frames of full scramble, but also in the last couple frames we're going to be whipping that arm, okay? All right, and he pulls himself forward. So here we are. So here's where we are so far. We have the moment where he's just rocking back and forth, and then and then pulls himself forward. So let's start with the scramble on the arms. All right. So again, first instinct is that it's going to be motion blur. But what are you motion blurring? If you remember from the beginning Cartoony lecture, or I think it's just called Cartoony, where we started was looking at how timing is affected by exaggeration, because the most common pitfall is to think that to get cartoony animation you exaggerate everything. Timing is the first thing that we all exaggerate when we're doing a cartoony for the first time, as well as squash and stretch. So you get very like overly snappy or overly pushed timing, and very squashy and stretchy and like sort of like gelatinous creatures. And that's not how you approach it at all. If you haven't seen the Cartoony lecture, it is an eye opener. I have been told that it's the strongest, or it's like the biggest aha moment that you can get on kennyroy.com. So please check it out. But coming back to this concept, so we talked about how the principle of timing can't be arbitrarily or infinitely pushed. Some things can, this one can't. Okay, so you end up with problems in timing because when you try to push, like for instance the 2-frame run cycle, if you have someone running really fast and really cartoony and it's like an 8-frame run cycle, well, if you try to make them run faster, or you try to make them like appear, or the impression is that they're going faster, you can't just cut that down to 4 frames. Because you'll have 2 extremes and 2 passing poses, and it'll look like it's strobing. You can't go even further than that, because in 2 frames it would just be literally strobing. Like the pose would be mirrored on both sides. It would just be like flashing in place, right? That would make no sense. So back to what we're looking at. So what do we do the motion blur on? Basically, what is the action that we need to do? So timing can't be pushed infinitely, but we can give the impression that the arms are doing, I want them to be looking like they are cycling backwards as fast as possible. And we do that by making sure that just like the flashes of the pose that the audience is going to be able to read, really read as if they are windmilling, and that's going to be involving some bending. That's going to be involving a lot of things. But it's not the way we don't approach this is we don't key like an 8-frame windmilling of the arms, and then I want it to be faster. So now it's all of a sudden it's 4 frames, and now all of a sudden it's 2 frames, and 2 frames would be like 1 frame like this, and the other frame like this, and just be like bup, 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 right? Even though they're going around, what do you get out of this? You get nothing, okay? So let's start building in these poses and try to get something like super strong out of these, okay? I'm going to start with the arm that's on our side. Let me fly this pole vector. Remember that tip that I gave, like the very first, I think it was 1 or 2 video mails into November 2010. Was flying the pole vectors. So we want it to be just a little bit off of the elbow, so that as we're keying it, it kind of behaves, actually, rather. And we can actually use, I would say probably for now, let's not use, because it has a mode where it actually follows the IK control. I don't want to have to counter animate it every frame, even though I'm probably going to put a little animation on those pole vectors. Let's just leave it as it is for now. All right, so I'm going to start right here, okay, and have his arm basically, look like it's about to go backwards. Now, again, if it was going backwards in this pose, wouldn't that kind of mean that it's almost like a boomerang that's like rotating around this point, and it would just be kind of like in this area? Yes and no. All right, I say no because if we don't draw attention to the violent pose change that's going on in this arm, then we won't get the audience's attention at all. So right after this frame, frame 35, well, just one frame later, I'm actually going to straighten it out and stretch it out, okay? And actually just kind of break it like this, okay? So we go from here to here, all right? Now, what might the next pose be? If you're thinking about, again, this kind of like cycling and working, working correctly, then the elbow might always kind of stay, not broken. So, something like this, where it's coming around, it's coming around the bend and whatever, right? I don't like that. I don't think that it's going to give the strongest impression to have this elbow still bending this way, okay? So physics and mechanics and physiology be damned, I'm actually going to get a reversal in the arm. I'm going to stretch it like this, okay, and then I'm going to turn on the stretch on the arm using the arm stretch attribute to give myself, sorry about that, to give myself a little bit more of an elbow, and then I'm going to put it on this side. I'm actually going to flip it the other way, okay? So that it actually, it's completely broken, right? It's totally broken. There's nothing right about this, but it's actually keeping us kind of a little bit stronger on the impression that I'm trying to give, okay? Now this is actually a little slow. All right, if you ask me, this is actually a little slow. Three poses and it's only gone halfway around. All right, so we need to speed it up. All right, let's go all the way back, okay, I'm going to set a key on all these frames. All right, and I'm going to also grab that pull vector. Let's go all the way back to the start pose, okay? And let's edit it just a little bit to be even stronger and a little bit more pushed, okay? So I'm talking about doing a little bit more elbow impression, and let me sort of come back a little bit more toward camera view and see what we can get. I'm going to really trying to get like a curve, like a whip in this elbow, because I want to do another straight, I'm sure of it, downwards this way. And if we have the elbow kind of whipping out like this, a little bit lower, like that, I'm sure we're going to get something awesome out of it. I also need to set a key on these, otherwise, otherwise they'll get all screwed up. Okay, here we go. So here's my start. Actually, sorry, 34 is my start. Around like this. Okay, and now I'm sure I want a straight. So let me just copy all of these and the pull vector, paste it right here, and let's get this straight down here. Now I don't want it to be that stretchy. I don't want it to be that stretchy at all. I do know I want a straight. Let's get the wrist involved. Down. Now this is going to be another one of the weird ones. Maybe if if you're following along at home, this is going to be a weird one. I'm going to do it somewhere up right here. Now, why I'm going right here when it looks like it's slowing down, like going from here to up here? Well, in actuality, I'm trying to give the impression, it's going to be like up here somewhere, I'm going to try to give the impression that it went all the way around once and a little bit more than right here, okay? And the way I do that is I'm going to try to really get this whole thing feeling like it's been whipped completely around, okay? So I'm going to try to get as much stretch of this arm as I can to really get that looking like it's bending, okay? And try to get, try to also get an attractive shape. It can be very finicky, this rig. All right. All right. Now let's okay. Now let's do a little bit more of just like kind of like a calm. Got to reset all these guys. Where'd you go? Where's the last one? Let's do a little bit more of a calm rotation. Let's get that elbow down. And now I'm hoping that I've established enough of that whipping. I'm going to go back again and do it again and basically kind of rely on the fact that it's supposed to be that this has gone all the way around. Okay, so it might look like opposites, but from here to here, it's supposed to be more than one rotation. And we'll only be able to see if we're giving the right impression when we start watching this back and start making those tweaks, okay? I'm going to do just one more kind of by the book straight again. A little bit of curve. Let's do it down here. Actually, let's just use the elbow this time. Don't worry about things flipping. Don't worry. Everything can be fixed. I remember when I was in art school and I came in and I was so disappointed because I had this assignment that I was like, oh my gosh, my assignment's all ruined. It was a drawing. It was for illustration class. And there was a piece of glue that had fallen onto the illustration, like right in the middle of where my pencil, my pencil work was. And this guy, he's like, oh, no, don't give up, man. You can fix anything. And he took my drawing. Oh, I'm loving what this looks like. He took my drawing and he took an X-Acto knife and he basically cut like one layer of the paper and proceeded to start fixing my drawing for me, and like totally, like basically didn't even say a word. It's like, no, don't worry, man. And he totally did it. He actually fixed the whole thing. It was perfect when he was done. And first of all, I was so in his debt. I like wanted to kiss the guy. I was so excited. But that was always my mantra from then on. I was like, you can fix anything. So while you're doing this, be if you're going to be worried about one thing, it's like be worried about the impression you're giving. Be a slave to the impression. All right. So I'm going to have him start doing the anticipation for this. In fact, let's get the elbow up and let's actually stretch this. See what happens. And I'm going to turn off that arm stretch. Okay. Now this frame is going to be our smear frame. So it's very important that we get a very, very easily recognizable shape. Probably not one where we can't see the elbow like that. There we go. Okay. Okay. So let's watch this. Now it's going to be a little bit willy-nilly, but we're going to make adjustments to it so that the impression is stronger, the more we work on it. Okay, so let's see what we got. Wow, it's actually pretty strong already. Do you notice how it's very subtle? You know what? I don't want to take credit for for luck, but do you notice how it starts off you can actually watch these 3 frames, these first 3 frames, and it looks like it accelerates right here, and then it goes from here to here. It actually looks like, past frame 38, it actually looks like it's doing more than 1 rotation per frame. I don't want to take credit for luck. This is a very lucky first try. So don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to sit here and say like, oh, look how cool I am. Oh, good this looks. But I am happy with how this looks. Okay. Okay. I'm finding it a little distracting that there's no animation in the chest. So I'm going to animate the anticipation right here. Okay, so that's obviously very rough, but I'm just finding it distracting that I wasn't seeing anything happening in the chest there. Okay, so it really feels like it's starting to wind up. All right, so this is what you can do. I'm going to save a new version right now. All right, and it's going to have, just because I'm saving the scene, it's going to have all of the animation on this arm. Okay, so I know that if it comes to it, I can select the arm, copy the animation, and always get it back to this arm. But I'm going to now start actually what could be considered baking in this arm, this first arm. Okay? So because I purposefully created Pierre in sections, this is very easy with Pierre. So this being his first arm, 34, I think we said to 48. Okay? I'm going to go and hit Control D, all right? And then I'm going to go into my outliner, all right? I'm going to find it, and I'm just going to see where it is for now. I'm not sure if you guys know this trick, but your outliner, you can drag up a tab right here, okay? And this is still your outliner, but the nice thing about that is that you can move something like out of a group that's like really big, and it takes up like your whole outliner, okay, like that. Right? I'm going to go frame forward, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to frame it right here, and just drag it right here. Frame forward. I'm going to duplicate, find it right here. Frame forward. If you want, I mean, it's already getting a little bit hard to see which one is which. You can also group this and call this arm, or arm 1. I would call it arm 1 group or arm main group. Okay? And then you can hide the group, and then you know, okay, well, all I have is this so far. Okay? Here we go. Control D. Let's put it, oops. Where's my arm main group? Put it in the arm main. Okay? Again. And so on and so forth. Almost there. Now I'm going to say that we're probably not going to be using anything after, probably not going to have any multiples after 44. So let's just say that that is good enough. Okay. Now what you have to do is on each one of those arms, you need to, I'm going to show the group, on each one of those arms, you now need to show that arm only on the frame that that arm is supposed to be showing. Okay, so this one's 34. And this is, one way you can do that is you can select all of them. All right, hit set key, and the visibility is on. Hit set key again, turn it off. Hit set key again on another frame. Oops, how did that happen? Set key again, visibility is on, turn it off. Okay, so now, oops, don't select that. There we go. So now they're all on for one frame, and you can kind of save yourself a little bit of time by selecting this one, and I know it's supposed to be on 34, right? So then I move it like that, okay? 35. Let me just figure out, let me move all of them. Now it's kind of hard to see. 34, 35. Oops, I did not move all of them. I moved all but one of them. I mean, I only moved one. Okay, 35. So the one that's down here is the one that's supposed to be on 35. So which one is down here? Okay, this one and this one. I grab this, I move this to 35. You see that? Okay. See? Perfect. Okay. Now frame 36. Okay, which one's down there on 36? This one and this one. Okay. Move it to 36. 37. This one and this one. All right. So it's not too difficult, but it will take a second for you to get them all back to where they're supposed to be. This is supposed to be 38. 39. Oh, it's a crazy one. This one and this one. Or is it this one? I don't know. Not this one, this one. 39, 40, this one and this one. 41, these two guys, almost done. 42, these two guys. 43. I think this is the last one. Right, because we said 44 was, we don't want to put one on. Okay, so now the arm is all basically baked in, okay? Now there are scripts that do basically the same thing. In fact, you could also bake the geometry. You could save a version of the scene and bake the geometry, which you may find is more exciting for you. And but I just don't like the idea of having to load multiple geometry caches into a scene. If that's fine for you, then definitely go about it that way. But I find that this took all of 10 minutes to completely set up, and it's fine. So now though, we have a version of the scene, and let's save this as a version of the scene where it's the animation and the main one is baked. So I'm going to call it Cartoony 3, but then main baked. Okay. Next part of the workflow is to start doing the animation of the first multiple. And the funny thing is that your main character's arm is actually going to become the first multiple. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a multiple on every single frame. All right. So how do you decide where the multiples go? Well, here's what I like to do. All right. Now, just because I said that you don't want to exclusively follow just like a motion blur pattern doesn't mean that you don't take into consideration what's happening between frames. And especially on the frames where we're starting to give the impression that it's going more than once around, it's going to be very important to to make a multiple there that kind of shows that intermediate position. All right, and I'll show you what I mean. So as we start going, it's flipping down here. So we might want to do a multiple that's kind of just like the beginning of this kind of like a motion blur, right? So it's kind of a lagged, almost like overlap, okay? Here as well, we might actually want to just bring it off so it looks like just like motion blur. As we start getting a little bit crazy like this, then we want to kind of now start telling the story, right? So as it got right here, the elbow didn't necessarily stretch all this much in the beginning. So it's kind of like we're not doing motion blur, we're actually kind of rewinding the pose just a little bit. All right, does that make sense? I know I can't hear you, but yell at your computer if that makes sense. All right? All right? Something like that. You see how we're kind of like rewinding the pose a little bit before it gets like a little too nuts. All right? Now here is our first chance to kind of start telling like the real story. So as it comes around, how does it go from this round to this straight? Well, it might, the elbow might really lag behind and then snap in. So let's just do that. Let's just do the elbow movement instead, right? Keep the hand where it is. Start going a little bit crazy, bringing this elbow back into position. You see that? Now things get crazy. I'd love it if I can get this shape to kind of conform in here. I know I'm probably not going to be able to. The controls of this rig, don't get me wrong, they're great, but they're not 100% so versatile that I'm going to be able to. I don't think so. So let's try to. I really wanted the shape to start blending into here. So let me see what I can do. Let me do this. Let me reset. It's probably a good time for these intermediate controls to start, or to just go back to normal just for a second. And where's the elbow? Okay, so if my elbow's up here, oh, I know what I can do. I can stretch it this way. And I can get it in line like this. And I can raise this one. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to be able to do this. Just get this in the corner a little bit. Nice. There we are. All right. I know this seems like a little bit of a drag, this one, because it's kind of like just a straight up motion blur. But now it starts getting interesting because it's accelerated so much that I want to actually give the impression that it's gone all the way around. So this is the first one where we're going to really actually kind of put it opposite to the other one. And now we're going to just kind of continue that thought. Okay. Wow, these shapers are sometimes just out of control. Actually, you know what? Let's go the other way. See this? Here's already a problem. So it basically strobes too much. Here's the arm in one, and here's the arm in the other, and it's basically strobing. So I need to bring this up to I need to basically like really start trying to catch this arm up to the other one and take a little bit more unique shapes with the elbow here. Let's try that. There we go. Now it doesn't look like it's strobing as much. All right. All right, on 44, it's back to normal. So actually, we can probably catch this one up a little bit more as well. All right. Now it looks like this one to this frame is actually just moving to the left and not actually cycling around to the right. So we're having to kind of like move it further and further away to get that right impression. There we go. And this needs to come over now. That much is clear. Awesome. Do you notice how, when you're watching this back, that you're actually getting the impression that it's moving so fast that your eyes are not actually seeing multiples? It's actually, it almost looks like it goes into 48 frames per second and your eyes are just not seeing it correctly. That much, when you can achieve that, you're starting to be in the right zone, okay? So things start getting very exciting, all right? So now I want to do the smear on this on this one, right? And I'm old school. I don't like the scripts that do the smears automatically. I like to actually basically sculpt the shot to be what I want it to be. So it may seem a little bit rudimentary and kind of, you know, maybe not taking advantage of the tools that we have, but at the same time, I kind of feel that without the knowledge, without that beginning understanding of how Cartoony kind of works, you wouldn't be able to use any of the tools anyway, or you could plug them in and all of a sudden your whole shot is smeared, but you don't really get the mileage that you do when you're thinking about what it's going to be. So the workflow for this is I keyframe this kind of like how I want it, like with this kind of like whipping action. But as you can see right here, this pose, super weak, right? It doesn't really look like the whip, okay? And that's because the workflow for this is to kind of decide where you want your smears to be, all right? And then if you're not absolutely sure that you can get the shape that you need, then you don't actually want to go too crazy custom with your shapes, all right? Because you'll just get yourself into the position where you're not able to kind of achieve what you were trying to. And I'm going to have this way out here, but I'm going to adjust this arm. So I'm not afraid what the arm is doing right now, all right, at all. I'm more concerned with making sure the geometry is in the right place for me to get the smear that I need, all right? And this is how I'm going to work on this. I'm going to select the geometry and I'm going to bake it by duplicating it on the right frames, but I'm only going to do it on a few of them, actually. So right here, I'm going to do it. Right here, I'm going to do it. And there's going to be a little bit of almost like overlap. So just 3 frames, okay? And I got to do the same thing that I was doing on the visibility for these as well. And this doesn't take long. And I'm going to key the visibility off on the main arm through this, basically this whole section. Okay. Okay. So here's the main arm. I'm just going to key this visibility off. And then back on. All right, so here we go. So he flips it out and then he comes back, and we have the right arm. All right, so here's what I want to do. Like I said, is not necessarily the matter of getting the arm to look almost like motion blurred, as it is to kind of tell the story of like how it got into that position. Okay, so I'm actually going to start just using just this vertex move tool. If I hit B, then it gives me a soft selection. I can edit the radius by holding down B and changing it. And I'm going to just kind of massage this just a little bit to get a little bit more of a shape that's moving backwards. So it's almost like he's leading it with his elbow, actually, in reality. Like this. All right. Now, I also want this to start smearing basically backwards. So I'm going to select, if you take an edge and you double click on it, it will give you the edge loop. Okay, so I'm going to select just these edges in the middle and basically start dragging them out like this. Okay, and just select a few less. All right, and kind of bring it out like that. All right, and smoothing this is very, very, very easy. You can use the sculpt tool. You can use the average vertices. Average vertices will actually shrink your objects. Sculpt is probably the best way to do this. And I can actually show you that. It's not too hard. If you hit F3 to go to the polygons menu set, and then you go to mesh, sculpt geometry tool, and then just hold down the shift key, and then you can just paint a little bit of smoothing. Okay? All right. All right. Now this is the one that I really want smeared. All right, I want this to be super smeared, and let me show you how I'm going to do this. All right. Sort of same idea. All right, but I want almost the entire edge to be lagged. All right, almost. All right, we're gonna sort of remove the radius a little bit. Okay. Now this might seem a little crazy, but bear with me for a second. Is that not the nuttiest thing you've ever seen? Isn't this crazy to do animation like this? All right, and I actually even want a little bit of a bulge in the middle, kind of showing the elbow, kind of showing like where the elbow came from, like that. Maybe that's too big. Yeah, like that. All right, and now I want the whole thing to be kind of bent like this. So this kind of represents the elbow before, so I can bring this down and kind of get a sharp point right here, and that's the elbow. All right. Same thing with the hand. All right. I'm going to take the hand and really get crazy on it. Oh, I need to center that pivot first. Same thing, going to grab these edges. All right. Don't need all those. Doesn't need to be too big. And I want it to really just kind of like kiss the edge here. If you hit B, again, it kind of makes a new range for your fall off, sort of. All right. This is looking pretty sweet. All right. So now let's head back to the sculpt geometry tool. Smooth out just a little bit. Not too much, don't want to lose everything. Grab this, do the same thing over here. Don't want to lose everything. Am I losing too much? No, that looks good. Now, I still want to have almost overlap. So the momentum, this is what I'm talking about when I say tell a little bit of the story of the action. The momentum across frames, all right? And this is when you say, this is when you start to break and you say like, okay, this is not just motion blur, this is more like we want to give the impression of something. What do I want to give the impression of right now? It's that when his arm swings, it is a ton of like whipping lateral motion, but also that right when it gets to the end, that the hand hits and slaps like in a frame that we don't even see. How do I do that? I'm actually going to put a smear of that hand on a completely different axis. It was like off like this before. I'm going to do an axis like this, okay? Like it slapped the ground, okay? So you'll get to see that right now. Okay. So if you go Control right click, edge loop, to edge loop, that converts your selection to an edge loop. And now I'm going to delete these bottom edges like that. Shrink my selection down a little bit. I don't need those very front ones. I definitely don't need these very back ones. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Now this definitely calls for a little bit more customized sculpting. It's going to need a lot of smoothing, I think. Actually, you know what? Let's do this. This will look cool. I'll have two kind of smears. One on the tips of his fingers, like up there, and then one down here, like his palm, like this. This one should be out further though. Okay, you see that? There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. I love that. I love that streak. Love it. I could get more of that kind of streaky action. Not a lot of geometry here though, as well, which kind of begs the question: why didn't we smooth before we did this? That's not really important. You can smooth it before you do it, or you can smooth it after. Either way. I'm going to just do a little bit of smear on, oops, that's too big. Just a little bit of smear on these top verts right here. Oops, this one is not behaving. This vert, there we go. Now to get, and look, see how I'm not concerned that they're not touching or they're not like perfectly lined up? That doesn't matter at all. In the old days, this was like blobs of paint. It wasn't a rig. You know, why does that matter? So I'm going to do just, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to exaggerate this just a little bit more. Okay, just a little bit like that. And I'm going to actually rotate this thing. Oh, I got to rotate the verts. just a tiny bit. Let's see what that does. Okay, so here we go. Now, obviously, man, as hard as I try, I never get everything in a lecture. But I think you understand how this workflow goes, and now the left side would not be too hard at all to do. I'm just going to hide this just so that it's not distracting. Okay, so here we go. Here is our new action with the multiples on the arm windmilling and some awesome smear on that hand smack. Let's take a look. All right, really cool. Now remember, please remember, when you're starting out, you have to know the workflow for Cartoony, which is try to give the strongest impression that you possibly can. You have to come up with your visual similes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please check out the Cartoony lecture. Then we move on. You can start having fun with the impressions that you're giving. In this case, once you start really being totally comfortable with the impressions that you're giving to the audience, it's time to actually embellish them. And that's really what a smear and a multiple is. It's an embellishment on your idea and your impression. Here I wanted the impression to come across that he's moving his arms so fast that there's actually motion happening in frames that we can't even see. And I think you'll agree that when we watched that back, and rewind and watch it a few times if you want to get a little refresher right now. Just watch that last version that we just saw. But I think you'll agree that when we watched it back, it's almost as if we were play blasting our animation and without motion blur, and our eyes were just seeing. You just can't keep up to that really, really fast motion. It didn't look like there were multiple arms, okay? And that is really where you want to be. You don't want it to look like that moment when one cartoon character used to like tackle another cartoon character in the old cartoons. And what ended up happening was like they would just be rolling around and there'd be smoke, right? And then like exclamation points and like little like squigglies, and then like an arm, and then like another arm, and like they were just popping out of nowhere. And you don't want it to look like that. And nothing against the animators that used to have to animate those things. I just don't think that they were. I just don't think like in the TV animation that was the style of that time. I think now we kind of fully understand a little bit more how you can how even like the smallest adjustments, the smallest things have like a huge impression and a huge impact on the impression that you're giving. All right, so I think that when you have that multiple there and it looks like that you're just seeing like way more motion than you could naturally see watching it back at 24 frames per second. I think that is like a great goal to have, because obviously if as an animator, and we think pretty technically, but as an animator, if we're thinking like, wow, this is like, we're seeing so much motion, that we're being tricked. We think we're seeing something that's happening so fast that we can't even track it with our eyes. That's the impression that I was trying to give, all right? So start with that motion blur kind of like approach where you're kind of like lagging behind, or you're trying to fill in the in-between frames, but don't just stay there. Try to actually tell a little bit of the story. Like for instance, like one of the poses was, it was just like the hand was in the exact same place, but the elbow was out there. Why? Because I had a really crazy pose on the elbow, and then I basically brought it back in. And how did I bring it back in? Well, I kind of told the story of how the elbow rounded that corner and then came back to where we can see it. Then when we moved on to the smear, it's almost the exact same thing as in terms of the approach. The workflow is to get the geometry in place. If you have sort of like a weak pose, it's more important that you have the geometry in place where it can be smeared into a really nice position and into a nice smear, better than to actually like copy the geometry or extract the geometry or bake the geometry, whichever one you want to do. in a pose that is like so overdone that then when you start trying to like sculpt that smear, you're not going to get anything. That's why that straight arm was perfect, because I could grab it and I could smear it all the way back. It looked like a fan. It was perfect. Then at the end, I told another story, right? In between frames, in between the frame where he's whipping it, his hand actually has so much like slapping momentum that the smear goes from actually being off to the side and behind to actually a straight down smear. Okay, that's another a change I gave to just bolster that impression a little bit more. Okay, I really hope you try this. It's really fun to do. Just try to do this on one of your scenes that's already animated. I promise you'll have a blast. If you're having technical problems like accessing the geometry of the rig that you're using, post that in the forums and see if some of your friends can help you, or send me an email. I'd love to help you out. Okay. I look forward to seeing your guys' suggestions for lectures in the future. Go to the resource wish list in the forums and suggest your topics there. Send me Ask Video questions as always. Good luck with your animation. And as always, rock on.